Sorry about that. I do have my notes a little mixed up, but I do have it right here. So this session is an LNG forum. It is sponsored by GE Gas and Power. How the session will go is that we will have 3 presentations. I will introduce the presenters of the presentation and the presentations, and then following the presentations, we will have a panel discussion. The theme of the panel discussion will be emerging trends and opportunities in Africa's LNG markets, outlook on small-scale LNG, virtual pipelines, and the creation of domestic-to-gas power infrastructure. I'd just like to, the moderator for the session, unfortunately was not able to make it, so I've had to step in. So I do ask the audience to please bear with me. I have no MC or moderator experience, but I will do my best to make the session as interesting and riveting for all in attendance as well as the speakers. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce to the stage Mr. Patrick O'Driscoll, who's the sales director. Oh, sorry, my bad, that's an error. I would actually like to introduce Mr. Ezekiel Adesina, who is the Secretary General at the Africa Energy Study Group, to begin with his presentation. Mr. Ezekiel, you're welcome to come to the podium.
So where's the presentation?
It's about to go up on the screen.
Okay.
So you can
The other one there. Hello, good morning, everybody. My name is Ezekiel Adesina. I'm wearing 2 caps here today. Firstly, I'm the head of strategy for Nigeria Liquefied Natural Gas. So I'm also the Secretary General of African Energy Study Group. But I'll be speaking on this forum on my 2nd cap, which is upping energy security in Africa. So I'll be talking as the Secretary, Executive Secretary of African Energy Study Group in this forum. So I'll quickly move into what we need to do because of time. So we want to talk about emerging trends and opportunity in African energy market. So I will start with population. So what's the first thing we need to look at? What the global population look like? The world is projected to be currently 7.8 billion people. And this 7.8 billion people, that is the current population of the world. And if you look at it, it's projected to be 9.8 billion by 2050. And with that, Africa also have a very large share in this population. There's correlation between population and energy. When there's population, there will be energy demand. So the world needs energy because the population is growing. So because I will not want to take much time in this slide, and natural gas will play a very big role in that growth as we move, as the world grow and population and energy grow. So natural gas will be a very good source of that blend. So what do we see from COVID-19? So what do we witness? We witness some unprecedented levels in energy that we've never seen before. The first thing we saw that COVID-19 did is that we saw a drop, a decline drop, the largest drop in 70 years in energy, 6% in 2020. Another thing we saw is the electricity demand is actually dropped by 5% in 2020, also the largest drop since the Great Depression. We saw another level during COVID-19. Low carbon technology, for the first time, overtook coal as the leading source of electricity in the world. Also, we saw demand for coal dropping by 8%. And this shows a new paradigm in what is happening, a big disruption to the energy equilibrium that we're seeing in the world today. Can I move to the next slide, please? So, without much ado, we're in the era of gas. Gas will always play a bridging fuel, a complementary fuel. So whether we talk about energy transition or whether you talk about fossil fuel, gas will be a bridging fuel. A gas will always play a major role in the energy mix in the world. It's abundant, it's cheap, and it's also friendly, it's environmental friendly. And you could see that gas is still available. It's 200 years of gas is available in the world. And you see a growth of 50% as estimated in terms of gas growth as we're moving forward. So you could see that gas will always be complementary to renewables. So for anybody talking about decarbonization or low carbon future, gas have a role to play. And gas will play a major role as we're moving into the future. So global gas demand. So what do we see in the global gas demand? Now, I mentioned what happened in 2020. We saw a very low price level that we've never seen before in the LNG market, as low as $3 per MMBTU. JKM, Japan Korea market, at $3 per MMBTU. That is unprecedented. So you'll see Henry Hub going as low as $1.2 per MMBTU. So, but what do we see after COVID-19? A massive recovery after in 2021 that we saw gas growing so heavily, and demand for gas currently is really, really at a very high side. We are currently going through energy crisis in the world. And you could see that energy crisis caused by those disruption in supply chain in the gas supply and the oil and gas supply chain. So a lot of investments were not coming in, and because of that, we saw a lot of destruction. So currently, gas is really, really not that cheap. As we're talking now, price of gas has really gone very high. There's electricity cut in India, in China, and the global energy crisis is coming. Within the next year, the world should be prepared for that. So LNG will always be a driver of growth in global gas demand. And LNG will always be that because China and Asia will always drive this demand growth. So gas have a bright future, and the demand for gas is really, really very high as we move into the future. Global LNG demand, I will not want to waste time on that. I've mentioned that. LNG becomes the main driver. China, Japan are the main importer of LNG. And if you take China, Japan, Korea, the Asian market is about 40% of the total marketing. So demand is expected to outstrip supply because a lot of LNG supply you are expecting in 2020 to come outstream because of COVID-19 could not. So FSL, ready for startup unit, were not ready, the plants were not ready, and liquefaction capacity did not come on stream because of COVID-19. So demand will always outstrip supply according to IEA. So without much ado, I'll quickly move to the next slide because of time. COVID-19 impact on gas have shown that gas is a resilient supply of energy. And we will see that as we are moving into the future. Strong recovery in LNG trade, I've mentioned that in Q3 2021, with a record price of $53 per MMBTU in Asia. That happened less than 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago. So that is really high. So we need to have a rethink whether gas is still a cheap source of energy as we are moving into the future. Because if you put $53 per MMBTU, that's about $300 per barrel of oil equivalent. So that means the structure and evolution of gas post-COVID-19 seems to require a lot of rethink about the gas business model. We need to rethink gas as a cheap source of energy as we move into the future. So I'll move to the next slide. So what do we see in the current reality? The current reality we saw now is basically global investments are down. The world talk about decarbonization, energy transition, low carbon future. But what do we notice? We notice that reduction in energy, there's a big drop in investment in oil and gas because of the decarbonization agenda. And now that the world is recovering, we could see that the scalability of the renewables and transition energy cannot meet that supply gap that we're seeing, or this demand gap, sorry, the demand gap we're seeing in the energy sector. So we are now in an era whereby a lot of clients are not actually putting money in investment in oil and gas. So the energy crisis I mentioned that you're seeing is going to be for a while. It's going to stay with us for a while. The prices of energy is actually going to be very expensive because energy security have a major role to play in countries above decarbonization. People will first of all look at how they provide their security for energy in terms of sustainability before you talk about decarbonization or low carbon future. So this is the current reality we saw in investment in oil and gas. I've mentioned something in the global LNG market. You could see that demand is projected to actually outstrip supply and maybe double the gap of what supply could give. So this is something we're seeing, and this is where people need to position for the errand of gas that I'm seeing as a bridging fuel to all the other sources of energy. I'll move to the next slide without much ado. Our current trend. We mentioned of FSRU. Floating storage gasification unit in LNG market is actually having a big share. You could see that within the West African corridor, and now you could see that in South African corridor, Southern African corridor. You can see them going to Mozambique and some other parts. From Ghana to Benin to Senegal, you could see FSRU project being a major desire for a lot of players. And this is because of infrastructure gap you see in Africa. So increasing domestic gas and small-scale LNG will continue to grow in Africa. And also increasing application of LNG as a transport fuel. LNG is now becoming more of a marine fuel, which is giving another source of that. LNG will also play a major role as industrial fuel. So this is a new trend, and the use rate, and for transportation, LNG will always play a major role as we go into the future. So without much ado, small-scale LNG market is very particular. I'm going into small-scale LNG a little bit because of Africa, because a lot of capacity you find within Africa are pockets of demands. And these pockets of demands need to be aggregated for them to attract big players. So you see small-scale LNG playing a major role within the West African or within African region. And that's why you see the FSRU unit and also the LNG-to-power. So from FSRU, you could see that it has grown. The small-scale LNG market is estimated to be about $50 billion in terms of projection, according to Deloitte. So it's growing, it's going to grow, and the capacity is about 75 to 90 million tons by 2030 in terms of growth. And you could see that the major driver there is actually transport, which I mentioned, bunker fuel, marine fuel, and also transport. So you see LNG to power, transport, marine, and also you see trucking as part of those that is driving small-scale LNG in terms of demand growth. So this is the gap of how installed capacity and liquefaction capacity look at in terms of in Africa. And you could see that Africa is really playing a major role in terms of gas monetization. A case for Africa. And Africa is about supplying about 14% of LNG trade, as we're seeing currently. Some of those maps need to be updated because some of those projects, there are some new projects in Mozambique, for example, that need to also look at those capacity going forward, just to make a caveat to that. Paradigm shift. Africa is now a new heaven in terms of a new place for LNG import. It's a center for LNG import. So because of infrastructure gaps, so you talk about virtual pipelines, and when you talk about virtual pipelines, LNG play a major role in this. So you could see this demand across Africa, and this pocket of demands, when you aggregate it, can actually be a major player in terms of what you look at in terms of net present value and in terms of investment opportunity across Africa. So, and I will tell you the reason why you see this happening in Africa. Basically, increasing demand. You could see that all countries, energy is a problem in Africa. Energy security is a problem. Up to 630 million Africans don't have access to electricity. So there will be a big demand for LNG. Replacing pipeline supplies, West African gas pipeline, for example, could not meet the demand of the West African corridor. So you see import of LNG doing that. Replacing oil to coal, gas become more friendly. A lot of power plants are now being switching to, are now changing to gas-fired plants. So that is also something that we need Declining population, you could see that in Egypt, where they are importing LNG and also exporting LNG. So bridging the supply and demand balance, you could see that also in South Africa, in Ghana. And these are all the reasons you see demand import. So I'm going to end with my slides of what you can see happening within the African corridor. Gas to power is a major thing in Africa because basically, African use gas as a major source of energy. Gas as a major source of production of generation of electricity. So you could see gas and LNG playing a major role in this electrifying Africa. So you could see Mozambique, for example, have an investment in FSRU, and that is in Maputo Harbor, and this is actually supposed to supply LNG, supply power within the FSRU, using the FSRU, and is expected to come on board on 2023. Cote d'Ivoire have Endeavour, signed with the local partners, and they're trying to bring 375 megawatt of power to FSRU. So you can see that in Senegal too. Senetec is also trying to do that by signing an MOU with Japan Moshoot and also with Qatar Brass in order to see how they can bring in 400 megawatts of power generation. You can see that in Benin. Also, you can see what is happening in South Africa. Richard Bay has indicated as a preferred location for importing LNG in South African integrated resource plan. So gas, we keep playing a role. Gas, we keep playing a major role in energy future. Whether transition energy, whether renewables, whether hydrogen, whether ammonia, whatsoever you call it, gas and LNG will be a major player, a shifting catalyst in bringing power to Africa. Thank you for your audience.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Mr. Adesina. We'll now call up to the podium Mr. Patrick O'Driscoll, who is the Sales Director at Karpowership, for a short presentation as well.
Morning, everybody. That's the clicker, yeah?
Just check if they're able to help. Here's the clicker.
Excellent. Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm Patrick O'Driscoll, representing Karpowership today. And some of the data that you've seen previously. Switch. I think some of the data that you've seen previously you'll see this in a different light of factual on how LNG-to-power is changing the landscape in power generation, not just in Africa, but across the globe. So there is a time restraint on me, so I will move swiftly on. Karpowership, at a glance, we are a global energy company. We are operating floating power generation and floating LNG assets that are all owned, operated, and maintained for the duration of the offtake agreements throughout by Karpowership themselves. And there is a transitional change throughout the company as we move to a much greener footprint with LNG and moving away from the traditional fuel sources that have been used in the past. So as a global presence, you will see here we are touching Africa, we've touched Asia, and now into the Americas, and that's now delivering some 30 power ships across the globe with 5 gigawatt of installed capacity, 5 FSRUs that are owned and operated by Karpowership aligned with the Powership business across the 4 continents and represented today operational in 11 countries. The LNG strategy came ahead of Glasgow, came ahead of forward thinking on seeing that the transition to a much cleaner footprint, not just for Karpowership, but for operating countries that are operating power generation today that don't have the ability of local indigenous gas. So LNG-to-power strategy includes a bridge to replace existing thermal capacity from liquid fuels to gas, as well as replacing old power plants with additional new capacity through power generation modules. The FSRUs and power ships are delivering access to a vital fuel supply, not just today, but going forward as countries try and work towards a much cleaner footprint across the globe. This video will give you an indication of the simplicity of the LNG-to-power concept. There was volume. Something's tripped. That's okay. We'll carry on without the volume. So this is the power ship receiving the gas as a vapor from the FSRU. This is the Karpowership FSRU that are owned and operated by Karpowership, and they are LNGCs that are converted to FSRUs by Karpowership as well. The LNGC will bring the refueling cargo for the STS, ship-to-ship transfer of the LNG into the FSRU. And then the LNGC will thereafter depart. Is it going? The LNGC is provided by various different suppliers of LNG to Karpowership, who we buy the LNG from, whether that be an IOC or an NOC, whoever has secured the LNG supply for the Powership project. The LNG comes into the regas module. Regassing the LNG and supplying the Powership, as I mentioned previously, with a natural gas vapor for the consumption by the reciprocating engines on board the Powership. They're not gas turbines, they are reciprocating gas engines operating in a combined cycle mode. Step up the voltage through the grid substation and power into the grid thereafter. So, as you see from the slide, the road to sustainable energy. Today there is renewables and there is coal, which is giving more carbon emissions. And we see renewables, natural gas and LNG playing a part together. They work hand in hand to derive a much more sustainable energy source for the country. So the gas to power migration, as you see here from the slide, we have Indonesia, Mozambique, Ghana, and Senegal. And as we look beyond 2021 and into the future, we have the Ghana project, Indonesia, and Senegal operating with an FSRU. Mozambique, likewise. South Africa through the risk mitigation power procurement program of delivering power into 3 locations. Also an FSRU with gas to power in Ivory Coast, into New Caledonia in the Far East, Seychelles, and more recently Brazil, where we've secured a contract with FSRUs and power ships for gas to power. So 2022 and beyond, you can see from the slides that we are growing our footprint with 950 megawatts through piped natural gas and an additional 2.5 gigawatts produced through LNG gas to power from our assets. Senegal, I'll touch on briefly. It's a first generation of 120 megawatts. As I mentioned, the equipment is owned and operated by Karpowership and is readily available. Within 28 days of the contract signing, the power ship was on location and delivering power into Senegal. Thereafter, the FSRU arrived and it will be operating into 22 on LNG via the FSRU that's aligned with the power ship. Ivory Coast, we're selected for a 200 megawatt power ship, and from that power ship there will be an FSRU in support of that will be delivering gas, vaporized gas, again into the power ship and also into the pipelines within the Ivory Coast. So it will be supplying gas to the necessary off-takers within the country, including current thermal power plants around the country. And latterly, South Africa. I think everybody here would be inconsiderate of me not to mention South Africa, since we're here in South Africa. Karpowership have been awarded a program of 1,220 megawatts of LNG gas to power as part of the risk mitigation program. This is an ongoing project that is working towards closure, financial closure, with the other incumbent players who were part of the total 2,000 megawatt award. The solution will reduce the costs and further boost the economy in South Africa, and it will mitigate the load shedding that people through this conference have been party to, and unfortunately it's a way of life, but there is a cleaner future moving forward with this to look at mitigating this risk. And that's the presentation. Hopefully I've done it quick enough for you, and we'll allow some debate later on. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Mr. O'Driscoll. Hanging in there, folks, we're almost at the panel. Last presentation by Mr. Octavio Molmenti. Just gonna show us a quick video and save viewers as well.
We prepared a short video that just summarizes our solution, which is pretty much modular and something that, given the energy crisis that we're currently having, is an immediate and effective, cost-affordable solution. We agree with our two colleagues. I think, if anything, the current world shortage of gas is not because of lack of gas, it's because of lack of investment in government policies. In the US, where there's been, up until 2 years ago, forward-looking aspect to the monetization of gas, we have 250 years of gas reserves. I think that we were discussing with some of our partners in South Africa. There is significant potential in more than 100 TCFs in South Africa and the neighboring areas. However, the regulation and the financing potentially is not there. So with that, just if we can show the video of Galileo. Thank you. So our view is there's a lot of stranded gas around the world, and we can do, I wouldn't say it's small scale, but I would classify as a modular scale. We can go for several few wells to large wells. As an example, you've just seen we connect 2 small wells into the system, and here you see a much bigger installation where you can connect one, in this case it's 1 PTA, and we are working on other projects are 3 to 4 MPTAs. So a solution is there, right? And I mean, and I think that this avoids the long-term of pharaonic long-term projects with pipelines that require off-takes and so forth. No, I mean, we can grow modularly from a small scale to a medium and large scale, be that onshore or offshore. And on the case of renewable energy being the cleanest energy, we disagree with that. We believe that the cleanest energy is renewable natural gas, which transforms a waste or many types of waste into energy. The only true carbon neutrality or true carbon negative fuels are renewable natural gas, transforming waste into energy. And that's something that we are actively doing, especially in the US, where we're seeing the molecule of gas of RNG, it be in excess of $100. We believe that in LNG worldwide, the best carbon neutral LNG or even carbon negative LNG is not the one that as the majors would do, develop LNG and then buy carbon permits, but the true clean LNG is one that is the normal fossil gas with a blend of negative RNG, achieving carbon neutrality or carbon negativity. So that's what the way that we're seeing the world. And I mean, it's I think even in a country like South Africa, where we're having energy shortages, and a lot of industries are rethinking their long-term plans. Modularity, I've seen, I mean, some of the colleagues have also solutions which are very effective, but modularity and something that is cost-effective and time-sensitive is the best alternative. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Mr. Molmenti. So we'll now begin the panel discussion. This is the LNG Forum. I just mentioned that this the panel sponsor for today is GE Gas Africa. GE Gas Power, excuse me. So the panel discussion will be centered around emerging trends and opportunities in Africa's LNG market, outlook on small-scale LNG, virtual pipelines, and the creation of domestic gas-to-power infrastructure. I think it's only fitting if we begin with proper introductions of our panel speakers today. I'll start by introducing myself. As I said earlier, my name is Rile Abetswe. I work in the programming department at Energy Capital Power, who are, along with the African Energy Chamber, the organizers of African Energy Week. I've had to step in today as our moderator was a no-show. So as I said, folks, I'll do my best to make it as interesting for everyone in attendance and for the panel speakers as well. First up on our panel, we have Mr. Octavio Molmenti. Mr. Molmenti is the Global Head of Strategy at Galileo Global Technologies. Next to Mr. Molmenti, we have Mr. Ezekiel Adesina, who is the Secretary General at the Africa Energy Study Group. Then followed by Mr. Fredrick Ndi-Obiosa, who is the Regional Manager at KBR. Then we have Mr. Patrick O'Driscoll, who is the Secretary General at the Africa Energy Study Group. Oh, my bad. Karpowership. We just saw the presentation. Karpowership, exactly. And then followed by Mr. Alfred Sima, who is the Vice President of Gas Sourcing and Business Development at SASL. And then last but not least, on our panel today, we have Mr. Oscar Garcia Berniko, who is the Director General for State Petroleum Companies and Petroleum Assets at the Ministry of Mineral Resources and Hydrocarbons of Equatorial Guinea. So how I will be running the panel discussion today, I will just pose the questions, and whichever one of our panel speakers feels most inclined to answer, the floor is yours. So let's get started with our panel discussion today. Thank you, Fredrick. Okay. As I said, whichever one of our speakers feels most inclined is welcome to answer. So the first question for our discussion is, what is the current outlook of LNG market recovery post-COVID-19?
The current outlook for LNG look very bright. Yeah, because basically what you're seeing currently is a demand, a global demand that is actually outstripping supply. When you look at renewable and energy transition, you need to talk about scalability, and it takes time for these to actually replace fossil fuel. So, and what you find out is that gas is the only that transition energy, a transition fuel that can actually play within renewables and the future. So the future for gas is bright, but the major challenge I think I'm currently having, because of the destruction in supply due to COVID-19, a lot of plant liquefaction capacity that's supposed to come on board are not actually in the market. So you see that supply. In terms of investment too, you see a low appetite towards investment after COVID-19, especially because of this decarbonization agenda. A lot of countries are not, or a lot of investment outfits are not investing in fossil fuel as it used to be. So that also is a big worry for me going into the future. But gas future is bright because whether carbon neutral, there will be carbon neutral LNG. Whether you talk about carbon credits or you talk about any kind of carbon initiative, carbon capture initiative, gas is evolving towards that transition. And gas will always be the future fuel that will complement all the other fuel that is emerging in the world. I don't know if there's anybody that wants to add to what I just said.
I think you'll see what, from one of the slides that I presented, the amount of new generation that is changing and being driven by LNG going forward. That is a demand that in countries where there is no gas, to bring LNG in and replace the existing infrastructure that is running on replacing thermal generation, that's running on crude oil, running on diesel, etc. LNG has a key part to play in that. At the same time, that allows, with the FSRU being a strategic storage for the country, that allows the country to then migrate its existing infrastructure to LNG, to a much cleaner source, playing hand in hand with Galileo of actually putting in virtual pipelines and taking gas. The FSRU will sit on the coast, but taking gas into the country, up the country, where there are decentralized mines, decentralized locations that are not connected to the grid, but running on diesel. So the ability for a country who either has gas or who doesn't have gas to have an LNG to power solution, that enables them to grow and start to drive decarbonisation of their existing infrastructure that they have in the country today.
I would agree, and I think that we all agree that the current situation, especially diesel, doesn't work. And I think that renewables work, but only if they're utilized as part of a blend, much more integrated, holistic approach. And bringing LNG, being that in a modular or in a larger scale fashion, is a solution. And as we progress, hydrogen potentially will work, but not in the short or medium-term future in our view. I think that even if we have to bring to South Africa LNG, I think that's a very good solution to address immediate needs. But I think that one of the fuels that's highly underestimated by most is what we're discussing before, RNG, right? And RNG comes from waste. And even if the LNG that we bring in the immediate to medium-term future is of foreign origin, I think that RNG will always be potentially based domestically. So that's also a solution that will create jobs, that will just minimize the effects on the current accounts, and will progress in a gradual format, potentially immediately 100% of the LNG being from a foreign source, but then blending it and having the proper regulations to continue to have maybe a 10%, 20%, 30% threshold of domestic RNG is a solution based also on implementing other blends of solutions like solar power and others. But as we've seen in the US, especially in Texas, where people over-relied on solar and power, that created a major crisis. So I think we need to think about just holistic, integrated and well-planned solutions, energy solutions, that blend many sources and not just ones.
Thank you, Mr. Molmenti. Would any of our other panelists like to add before I move on to the next question?
Maybe a more practical example of application of LNG in South Africa. So what we see as Sasol is this transition to net zero requires gas. However, there's three critical limitations on the ability of gas to get to the customers. Yeah? The first one being the ability to access affordable molecules internationally. Yeah? And what's happening in Europe today with the spot market, spot prices being all over the place, yeah, creates market uncertainty. Yeah? The second one, particularly in Africa, is the ability to deploy infrastructure at the speed that avoids what we are going through in South Africa, load shedding. Yeah? So that ability requires a deep understanding of what governments are trying to achieve through policy, through regulation, local content, ability to ensure that there is a meaningful benefit to local groups. We as SASOL are going through that in Mozambique, where we have realized that partnering with government also requires us to partner with communities and deliver meaningful, sustainable benefit. Yeah, it is a must do. The third, which is also important and particularly challenging in Africa, is the ability to interpret the regulatory environment that results in pricing and access to markets. I think Karpowership is going through that today as well, is that that ability affects your meaningful investment to enable banks and equity partners to get a return on that investment. Remember, all of these are not happening without an expectation for a return. Yeah? So regulation and government policy is quite critical to ensure the success of any LNG, especially from Africa perspective. And you know, I've heard a lot of speakers talk about the energy poverty in Africa. Small-scale LNG is a very viable solution, but it's a viable solution that requires an understanding of the long-term benefits to the country, long-term benefits for the community, and the ability to deliver on government policy expectations. I think that's what most of the energy transition objectives are not achieving, is making sure that you take government and communities along as you deliver projects to meet the energy expectations of the country at an affordable price that makes investors happy, makes communities happy, makes governments happy. So win-win for everyone, but very, very challenging under the current, a regulatory environment that is uncertain. I think we're going through that in South Africa today. You know, all of us are sitting here hoping that there will be no load shedding. And we know the challenge is not the ability to deliver energy. Technologies are there is appetite to invest. The challenge is the speed at which policy can catch up with the investment expectations.
Thank you for that. Before you, Mr. Molmenti, Mr. Berniko at the end, you look like you had something to say.
Yes, thank you so much. I think my colleague from SASOL said something very important, which is the energy poverty. And I would like to give you an example, because sometimes when we talk about energy poverty, some people, like the ones that are demonstrating outside, think that we are making an apology in favor of pollution or in favor of carbonization, and that has nothing to do with what we are trying to talk about. And I'll give you a perfect example. I am from Equatorial Guinea. Okay, in the 90s, in the island where I'm from, we would experience several days without electricity. Sometimes in the dry season, because all the powers we had was hydro. Okay, so in the dry season there was little power to be generated from hydro plants. We will spend several hours at night, a day, without any power. Okay. So the people that are demonstrating outside, including those who went to COP26, most of them from Switzerland, I think it was a kind of anecdote for them to experience what I experience on a daily basis. So I even think that Greta, when she was 6-year-old, she will enjoy having a power shortage at home. You know, that would be kind of an opportunity to play. When us in Africa, at least in my country, that was not something funny. That was something I was experiencing on a daily basis. And can you imagine the differences? Can you imagine under which circumstances, under which environment, any kid will grow without power versus someone that makes a joke because there is a power shortage for 3 minutes? Today in Equatorial Guinea, in the island where I live, it's an anecdote not to have power. You know why? Because there is a gas-fired plant that supplies power to the whole island. Actually, if you go to some towns that are not in the capital city, they will use power in daylight because they have it there. So the new generation of my fellow EDG nationals, they don't know what is, really experiencing real power shortages, okay? Because we managed to develop, we managed to monetize those gas resources that the modern nature wanted us to have in our own subsea grounds. So I think you said something very important about energy poverty. That is what we talk about, energy poverty. Another example is today in some countries in Equatorial Guinea, well, not so much, but in other countries, people will chop down trees for domestic consumption. And I want to believe that chopping down trees is actually not good for the environment. There are other means to do that include gas, for example, LPGs. I think it's better for the environment using gas that is a fossil fuel source rather than chopping trees, because actually in Africa, I think it was said that we have one of the lungs of the planet. So I think that we need to send the right message here. Nobody's making an apology of polluting the planet. We want our kids to live in a planet just the way we knew it. But it's very important to stop that message that is out there. We need to stop Africa energy poverty. That is the first message I have. The second one, not to be long, is just to share with you that right now in Equatorial Guinea, we are actively working on different projects. Not only to monetize the resources that are in our country, but also resources that are even in cross-border fields. Some resources that are shared with Cameroon, for example, and some resources that are not in Egypt, but maybe they are in Nigeria. And I think that gas is the fuel of choice in this energy transition world. So we need to make sure, and that is what we are doing in Equatorial Guinea, that not everything is monetized to be sent for power supply in China or in Korea or in Japan, just like one of our colleagues said here. But we want to make sure that part of those resources, part of that fuel, stay in Africa to make sure that it's used for domestic consumption, it's used for power generation, to improve our economy, to be more competent, to do all the sort of things that elsewhere they do with the fuel that is generated in Africa. So I think that is a very important point. And this negative message that is being sent actually is creating a situation whereby, unfortunately, it's becoming more and more difficult to identify capital for investment in the gas industry. But they are suffering, because today in the south of Europe, they are paying very high prices for gas. I mean, for us, I don't want to sound a little bit hypocrite, but it's good. You know, we were lifting some LNG cargoes last month, and we were paid more than $120 million per cargo. That is good for us. I won't complain. But what I'm trying to say is, I think the world can be a more fair place. So that message should be stopped. Not only to send them more affordable gas at a better prices, but also to make sure that here in Africa, we can actually develop our resources. So the last point that I wanted to make is regarding small scale. I think small scale LNG is something new. It's something that a lot of people are very hesitant. But I think that we need to invest more in small scale LNG. You see, sometimes in some countries, they won't have access to gas to generate power or for any other use, okay? And maybe they cannot allocate or they cannot receive, these 170,000 cubic meters ships. But maybe we can send more small barges to those areas to generate power. And I think the market is there. And we need to make sure that not only we think gas or LNG in a most traditional way, but we need to think it in a more, in a different manner. Like we need to evolve in what is the LNG market. I think someone made a good presentation here regarding how today the technologies available whereby a ship can monetize the gas, then ship it in a pipeline to another ship that will generate power. So that is something that I think that is my take today, that we need to stop energy poverty, and the solutions, the technology is there, the market is there, and I think that we need to make sure that there is additional investment, more investment in the LNG market, in the gas market in general. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Berniko, for your contribution. Before I move on, one last opportunity to add, Mr. Ndi-Obiosa.
Thank you very much. I think that was a very passionate speech about the need to meet energy demands within Africa. I think that is very true. But just to bring a little bit of balance or color to that, the issue that we face now is one of investment. When we are looking for investment, we're looking for investment from banks and ECAs and financiers that want or that have stakeholders who have a very big, who put a very big priority on ESG, and making sure that whatever these banks put money to is very environmentally friendly, it's sustainable, and it really encapsulates the desires of COP26 to be greener, to be more energy transition friendly, and to move away from dirty fuels. With LNG, with gas in general, I think that the elephant in the room that we haven't spoken about is methane. It's fugitive emissions. It's the issue with methane, it's, what is it, like 8 times more potent than CO2 in terms of contributing to greenhouse gas emissions in the short term. And it also contributes 25% to the global emissions today. And I believe when it comes to investment in whether it's in gas projects in order to get this gas out of fields and wells, or to install terminals, import terminals and the like, one thing that the financiers will be looking for would be the carbon accounting, the making sure from the producer or developer side that this is the cleanest molecule of gas that has been produced. And there's a lot of carbon accounting going on right now, not just in scope 1 and 2, but also extended scope 3 emissions. And this is going to become more and more, sorry, I don't know what's happening to this mic, more and more prominent in the next few years. And I believe that it is in our best interest, while we try to develop our fields, while we try to get these LNG import terminals, to make sure that our ability to not just say we're low carbon, but to show it in an auditable manner, that we're accounting for every molecule of LNG or natural gas that's being produced, and that we are in the whole supply chain, that we're making sure that it is low emissions, and also incorporating, as my colleague from Galileo said, waste to gas in order to even make it negative carbon, I think is critical to this development of LNG or natural gas in Africa. And I think it's going to attract a lot more investment if we can show, as producers or as people who are building these LNG import terminals, that we build them in the most sustainable way, and that, yeah, thank you. Sorry, just throwing me off a bit. That we build them in the most sustainable way, and I think this will help to attract investment. It will help to attract off-takers, because even off-takers are looking to make sure that they are getting the lowest carbon LNG from the market. And I think this is a critical part of the discussion that we should just be cognizant of. But I fully agree. Energy poverty is the first priority of ours when it comes to Africa, and secondly, making sure that is done in the most sustainable way possible. I mean, the waste to gas idea is not new. There are technologies that are well established to do this, but it's something that we just don't do enough of in Africa. And I think the ability to solve two problems at once, right? To deal with your waste and also to monetize that into something that you can sell, you can transport and distribute, and that you can even use to your advantage to gain financing because it is environmentally friendly and sustainable and helps create a circular economy is something that I think we, whether it's as NOCs, IOCs, consultants, whatever the case may be, that we need to look more critically into. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that contribution. Fredrick, I'm so sorry about the audio interruptions. I hope you don't mind sharing a mic with me, Mr. Molmenti, because we are done one mic. So moving on to the next question for the panel. In terms of creating demand in a highly competitive LNG environment, how can small-scale LNG suppliers utilize virtual pipelines to access more customers?
Thank you. A couple of things that I would like to highlight. I think it'd be wrong to say there's energy poverty. I think there's poverty of proper regulation, poverty of proper information, and poverty of proper incentives. I mean, the world has enough energy, both a traditional and a non-traditional, like we were discussing. I really like your point of methane, because I mean, it's the agro sector is producing a significant amount of methane, and thus a source of energy that we're not utilizing. Why? Because I mean, there's not enough information out there that points this as to be an energy source, and there's not enough amount of regulation that will allow projects to tap that energy on a long-term basis and banks to finance that based on that regulation. And on small-scale LNG, what we see is an energy source that allows domestic use of energy, because why? The capillarity in the supply and the capillarity of demand. And by capillarity, I mean we can use several new energy sources like farms to collect that methane, and also deliver to places in the country that would be unviable to deliver by a typical, high-power gas pipeline. So I think it's a most egalitarian form of energy. It's an energy truly done for the small producer and non-traditional, being a farm, being a sewage depot, and so forth, that would be producing waste. Now it can add their energy source and take it to small-scale energy demands that are throughout the world currently unreserved.
One major thing that we have not looked at, I've heard a lot of comments, and I've seen a mixture, a combo of so many issues. I say a cocktail of a lot of people talk about energy poverty, people talk about regulatory environment, people talk about the use of gas and all that. And there needs to be clarity, because that clarity allows us to know what are the real issues and how do Africa navigate these issues. Because if you look at what is the issue, how can a continent that is energy abundant now have energy deficiency? So the first issue is regulatory framework. And that regulatory framework needs to be there to it. Before you can talk about small-scale LNG, or whether you want to talk about gas or whatsoever derivative in terms of the gas value chain you're talking about, you need to talk about that regulatory framework. As far as you have a regulatory framework that is not predictable, you will have problem in terms of investment. And those are the issues. So when you have a regulatory framework that is not attractive to investors, people will not come. So we need to do something about our regulation. The problem with us is that we have regulation, and before investor could come in 5 years, it's already changed. A new government coming, it changed it. It's not sustainable going to the future. So we need to look at that regulatory framework. It needs to be predictable, and there needs to be sanctity of agreement. That is the only way you can actually have bankability. Because for your project to be bankable, those issues have to be there. Secondly, then we need to look at the issue in terms of what is the best way for Africa to monetize gas? And you can find out. There's a lot of solutions. A lot of people have talked about technology. Technology plays a major role. It's an enabler. But you should know that technology is just an enabler into that. Money is another enabler that you need to put in the question. Now, how do you do that? When you find a situation whereby government is trying to build a off-taker, government is trying to regulate the price, government is trying to actually be the one in the upstream, in the downstream, and all that, then you don't have anything in terms of clarity, in terms of who plays what. But gas price is about net back. So no matter what you put in there, people are not doing business for doing business. People are doing business in order to do business. So governments should face taxes and allow business people to do business. And that is the only way. So the best way for us to do is to unbundle that value chain. If you look at the value chain, I like the way the speaker spoke about power, ship-to-ship transfer, and LNG power. That is a value chain. So people should look at, within the value chain in Africa, where did I want to play? Did I want to create a pipeline whereby people can access the pipeline and I get a fee for the pipeline? Did I actually want to be a situation whereby I actually supply the gas and I get money for supplying the gas? Did I actually want to sell the gas to someone that owns the plant? Look at the tolling model in America. People build the plant and they never bother about putting money in the infrastructure in terms of the upstream. So somebody bring the gas, and you process the gas for him at a fee, and he sell the gas. So we need to recreate, rethink, retool the model we have in Africa for gas to work for us. The problem of energy poverty in Africa is not a self-inflicted problem, and we need to solve that. I love the argument from the Equatorial Guinea, because a lot of time you see people talking about, from my colleague from Equatorial Guinea, see people talking about energy, carbon future and all that. Like I mentioned about issue of scalability, and also how Europe and other continents are trying to climate change and the rest of them. But regardless of climate change, energy security will be the first priority against anything. I need to be energy secure before I can start talking. Now, everybody has gone to coal. We're talking about climate change. The coal of price. Coal is about 1.5%, 1.5, the price, initial price it is. Everybody is using coal. Nobody's talking about that because energy security comes first. So it is our own to actually develop a roadmap as Africa to see how we can secure ourselves going into the future. Nobody will do that for you. Nobody will do that for you. Energy security is a duty of Africans to do, and they need to do it now. So that is the real thing. We need to take that. On the short term, small-scale LNG is the way to go. It's the technology that is going to enable where infrastructure gaps are existing. And if you go to Africa, there's a lot of infrastructure gap. How many countries in Africa today can finance a major big LNG plant? Very few. You need to go to international market to look for money. So for you to be able to do that, you need to now start talking about small scale, modular technology like he mentioned. Those are the solutions that can work for Africa in trying to make electrification possible for Africa. Until we start looking at that and trying to see how do we enable those infrastructure gaps we have through some of this technology, small-scale LNG, LNG-to-power, and so many of those initiatives. That is the only way we can secure a future for Africa. And that is the right message we need to pass to the audience today. Thank you.
And that's one of the things that Karpowership drives. We drive the now, the ability, the power is now, the option is now, the technology is available. You've seen Senegal, they moved and it was delivered in days. Not months, not years, not financing. To have a 500 megawatt thermal power plant operating on LNG in your country within 90 days, pre-financed, because you're buying electrons. You're buying electricity. The future beyond that, to buy the gas, to build the pipelines, to put the virtual pipelines in, that is what grows the economy. You have to have, I agree wholeheartedly, you have to have the security of supply. And that's what we do. And it's there. And the choice is there. And the only people that can make that choice and make that transition is Africa itself.
Thank you for that, Mr. O'Driscoll. I'm going to have to move to our last question of the panel, and then I'll ask all our speakers to just say some closing remarks on the discussion that we've had. The last question is related to small-scale LNG, and the question is, how can small-scale LNG producers attract investors?
I think I completely agree with some of my colleagues' points, and I think that sometimes we all look for one solution to solve all of the problem, and we start thinking about pharaonic, large-scale solutions that will take a lot of time, that will take a lot of the proper regulation that currently is not in place in most places, and will take just years and years to get fixed. I think that with small scale, or as we like to call it, modular scale, it's much easier to bring investors on board for a medium to small scale plant or modular mobile plant, like some of the colleagues here that have mentioned, and show that there's profitability, that the current regulation works, and it's the only immediate solution to a short-term solution that can work. And I think with the proper returns and so forth, it's much easier to bring investors for a project that is maybe $200 million and can be in place and producing power either, as one of my colleagues was saying, Karpower, 90 days to 12 to 15 months, rather than a large-scale LNG project or similar project that will take 5 years. It will produce zero cash until the fifth year, and will have a lot of complexities and be of a magnitude of $5 or $6 or $7 billion. So I think small-scale, modular scale brings a lot more certainty, brings a lot more of the first cash flows forward in a matter of months rather than of multiple years. And that's something that investors will be able to digest easier. It's a much more quantifiable risk. It's a much more acceptable timetable. And it's something that we've encountered in the world. I mean, it's much easier to look for investments that are modular, no, for lack of a better word, rather than large, pharaonic, and will take several years into the future to see if even they produce any cash whatsoever.
So I know we're short on time, so I'll keep this short. Yeah, I believe that the small scale LNG industry is really going to see a massive boom in the next few years. As has been mentioned already, the lower cost is a big factor that works in its advantage. Also, the fact that the time to market is a lot shorter. I think at the end of the day, with any project, it's all about building a good business case. If you've got a good business case, if you've got off-takers, you've got security of supply, and you can show a potential investor that you've also got the ESG part covered, I don't see much that would stand in your way of being able to get financing or attract investment for that particular project. And I think sometimes I don't feel as though in Africa we do a very good job of building a solid business case before we go out for investment. We go with half-baked ideas, and I think that's what slows down a lot of projects. Also, we've talked about the regulatory framework, which I think has been spoken about in enough detail. But the truth is, when a country, an NOC, or a government-led organization has a master plan for energy which encompasses LNG, which gives a very clear roadmap as to how it intends to deal with investors and how it can make the regulatory environment attractive to investors. And then you've got, whether it's an IOC or an independent company, coming up with a project with a solid business case. I think those two things working hand in hand and making sure that it covers all the ESG aspects will give you a successful project and a lot of investment.
To attract investment in small-scale LNG, firstly, you need to know about the uniqueness in the gas business. The first thing in gas business is to market. Before you start doing anything, you need to market. That's the first thing in gas business. Unlike the other business, you need to get your buyers first. So firstly, you need to have your SPA in place. So what is your supply purchase agreement? How many people are you being able to gather that says, in this your project, we are ready to be an off-taker? That's number one you need to look at. You mentioned about security of supply. You need to have your gas supply agreement. Nobody finances a gas project without seeing what is the source of your gas supply. So you need to have a source of your supply, no matter how small that source of supply look like, and it needs to be guaranteed. We are not talking about source of supply for 2 years. We are talking about 20 years that reserve can actually take the lifetime of that small-scale project that you need to. The last one, for you to attract investment in Africa, you need to create the market. I think the problem we have here is basically, we don't know. We make the market. We need to be a market maker in Africa. A lot of time, we expect that somebody else will come and make the market for us. Asia make the market for themselves. We don't have a uniform gas pricing model in the whole Africa, even the African sub-region. You don't have it in West Africa, you don't have it in East Africa, you don't have it in Southern Africa. What can I call the whole price market price in West Africa? I don't have. So when you don't have that, how do you attract investors in trying to see how will I want to make a business case from that? So you need to create that market, and those markets are there. They're just pockets of markets, but it requires some government or heavy level to look at these small markets and try to aggregate this market so that this market can be accessible to players and also to other stakeholders within the value chain. So imagine if, for example, gas in Ghana, supply in Senegal, supply in Benin, all those pockets of demand in West Africa could come as a pool of demand, and you have a hub. And you say this is the West African up price. Then we're talking. So that is the most important part. We need to make the market. We need to talk to people in government. You need to make that gas market. The demand for gas in Africa is there, but they are all latent demand. We need to make them a real demand by making sure we make the market.
I'd like to give all our speakers an opportunity to make some brief closing remarks before we close off the panel.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to be very brief. I think it's very important also to have more discussions regarding the topic that I was mentioning before. And I like to give examples. Today, if you go to Germany, and you are a very pro-green guy, and you buy an electric car, at some point you're going to have to charge it, right? You're going to charge it because the car works with a battery. But the reality is, most likely, you will be charging your battery with electricity that is generated with coal. So you think that I'm so green, I'm using an electric car, yes, but in order to charge that battery, you are using power that is generated by coal. So what I would like to propose is the following. Why not shutting down the coal power plants in Germany and come with investment, come with capital to Africa? Since I'm a government officer, I would say to Equatorial Guinea. So you bring down money to my country, where we have a lot of gas discoveries. You put that capital we develop the resources, we generate the LNG, and then we send you an affordable source to generate power in Germany that is efficient, is definitely less polluting than coal, and you make money for my country. You have affordable and a good source of energy, so we don't have to go to Germany to immigrate there or something like that. So I think that what I want to say is we need to have, since this is the African Energy Chamber, the organizers, my proposal here is to have a second conference on where we can, on both sides of the table, have a new discussion on how Africa can allocate more capital investment to develop their resources, to make sure that we have energy security in Africa, and at the same time addressing maybe some of the gaps that are in the Western countries, addressing also, how LNG, how gas can be that fuel of choice. So those are my remarks and a proposal that I'm making to the chamber to consider maybe we can come next year to Cape Town and have a fun discussion. Thank you.
I'll be sure to relay that to NJ.
There's lots of very interesting conversation, but I want to bring a practical perspective from a Sasol initiative that we have undertaken. Sasol has been in operation in coal for the last 71 years. So 71 years, Sasol has been making chemicals and energy from coal. Yeah, we have taken a decision to decarbonize and move and reduce our coal-derived greenhouse gas footprint in the next 10 years, reduce that by 2030, reduce that by 30%. By 2050, we hope that technology would have caught up and we will decarbonize fully. So in other words, in the next 28 years, half the time that we have been in operation, we will decarbonize. Yeah? The point is, this journey to decarbonize requires considered alternative energy sources like gas to enable you to decarbonize in a manner that does not have unintended consequences. What are those consequences? One is, as we decarbonize, are we creating problems elsewhere? What are those problems? Yeah? Jobs. Are we moving away from a resource that has been value adding, of course polluting, but value adding, and migrating into spaces that are difficult to create jobs? So I want to use two examples that are very close to my heart personally, because I come from the Northern Cape. Yeah? I spend a lot of time in Uppington, where there's a lot of solar projects, and we welcome the investment. But when you talk to the communities, you get a very clear sense of the frustration that renewables has not delivered the social compact that was promised. And for communities, it's simple, it's jobs. Yeah? And we need to make sure that as we decarbonize, we get into spaces where the transition fuel gas enables us to safely move into a cleaner space while we don't have unintended consequences that will create other social problems elsewhere. And small-scale LNG could be a solution. Yeah? But a lot more important is, and whether we like it or not, Africa has got the market, but Africa does not have the financial muscle to deliver the scale of renewable energy that will take 630 million Africans out of poverty or out of energy poverty in the next, 28 years. So we have to be practical around what is the size of the challenge ahead of us. And it's not an easy challenge, It's lots and lots of billions of dollars that are required for us to invest. Yeah? But while we are doing it, we have to be delivering on the social compact that enables all of this to happen. Now, I've heard one or two comments around regulation. Yeah? So I've got a view around what our policymakers are trying to achieve. Yeah? And most of the regulatory spaces, I do not think our regulators would intentionally write laws or policies that will keep people out of jobs, keep people unemployed, have no social benefit. The investing community has to work with the regulators to make sure that the policy makes sense, it is doable, it is investor friendly, but it's also friendly to the communities. And I think for us as Sasol, we have realized that it is important to take everybody affected by this transition into that into the confidence of what we are trying to do. We have to create win-win partnerships with communities, with government, with investors, with our customers, with our suppliers, to ensure that we can deliver decarbonized Africa in a manner that has not created unintended consequences. I'd like to thank the conference organizers, my panelists, and most importantly to you for listening and giving us the opportunity to share thoughts. But I think it is this conversation that will enable us to get to a better outcome. We need to have a conversation that is practical, realistic, and it is this conference that is giving us that opportunity. We really appreciate the opportunity for the discussions, formal and informal, that enable a conversation in Africa, about Africa, for Africa, in a global world, in partnership with the rest of the world. So it is not an Africa at the exclusion of others. It is Africa within a global context. And this conversation hopefully will achieve the ability for Africa to deliver on solutions that works for the people in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Sema. Mr. O'Driscoll, I would just like to implore you to please do try to keep it brief. We have gone over time for our panel, so yes, you can go ahead.
I will gladly take LNG from Equatorial Guinea and make Africa a better place with security of supply. Okay? In terms of closing remarks, you've seen the presentation. I think the track record of what Karpowership has done within Africa in the shortest space of time is impressive. There is a lot more to do. There's 2 gigawatt plus operating in Africa. That can easily double in size, and it's quickly available and done quickly because of the speed, because of the modularity, and the ability of our belief in the market to self-invest in the capital equipment ready to be deployed. We believe in Africa. 2 gigawatt is a demonstration that Africa does believe in us, and together with people like Equatorial Guinea wanting to drive their gas out into Africa, let's do it together. Thank you.
So yeah, I'll try to keep it short. It's been a really good discussion. I believe that we need to have many more. The question on LNG is really one about looking at where the production centers are and where the demand centers are, and making sure that we bridge that gap. I think something that is clear is that if governments have a good roadmap for how to do this, and they look for partners and collaborators in order to make this happen, then we have a bright future in Africa. We've worked at KBR with loads of governments, whether it's Singapore, Trinidad and Tobago, and PNG, looking at their energy mix, looking at their policies and regulations, and making sure that they're able to be agile enough to respond to the market, to make sure that they can attract investment, that they can attract private investors to come in and make sure that this gap is filled, and quickly. And I believe that we shouldn't try to do this also in a vacuum. I know that we are proud as Africans. I certainly am, hailing from Nigeria, and we need to just be understanding of what the rest of the world looks at or values, and trying to make sure that we keep this balance, right? So, we want to use our resource, we want to monetize it, but there is a need to make sure that we are ESG compliant. There is a need to make sure that we are in step with the rest of the world, and that these two things are not in opposition. I think that they can be done holistically and synergistically to make sure that we make the best use of our resources in Africa, while also making sure that we do the best thing for our environment and sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you, Fredrick.
Yeah, to me, I think the first thing I need to say is that the solution is here. There's nowhere to look for the solution. We are the solution. And we need to look at that we are the people that will make Africa great. The first thing I want to talk about in my closing remark is firstly, look at the energy abundant in Africa. It's not only gas. You talk about geothermal, you talk about sun, you talk about wind, everything is available. But there's no integration of this together to create a workable, tailor-made, workable power mix within countries in Africa. So energy is directly related to GDP. Energy is directly related to development. If Africa is looking to develop going into the future, it needs to develop its energy sector. That's the first question. That's the first submission for me. The second one is about national integration. I see a lot of, I want to do it alone across Africa. You see, Nigeria, we want to do something alone. Ghana want to do something alone. They're not talking to themselves. Solutions are not communicating. Therefore, you see those solutions actually becoming obsolete over time. So there needs to be a way whereby the regional need to talk together. Southern region of Africa need to talk. How do we look at our policy? How do we look at the solution that can enable people in the southern part of Africa to have energy? Same thing to the western part of Africa. Same thing to eastern part of Africa. This is when that enablement in terms of commonality and integration can happen. But the moment you're talking separately, you found out that you will not be able to develop that turnkey solution that you are looking for going into the future. Lastly, for me, is that energy security is critical, no matter the decarbonization agenda. So one of the things Africa needs to think about now is about funding. The world is moving into carbon-friendly or low carbon future. The major way is going to impact Africa most is about getting funding for the oil and gas project. Therefore, you need to enable consumption in Africa. I've done a research with the African Study Energy Group, and we found out that 10%, less than 10% of what African generated is what is consumed internally. Majority are exported. So we need to enable that solution within Africa. Try to see how we can create energy solution that will work in Africa through the resources you have, and therefore develop Africa into the next millennium. And that is my submission, and that is the only way we can come out of energy poverty. Nobody, I tell you, nobody will take you out of energy poverty except yourself. Therefore, you need to do that now, and you need to do that with solution available. Thank you.
Very briefly, I think that what we need is energy now. We need a solution that creates local, good-paying jobs and that is environmentally friendly. What do we have? We have the energy, we have the demand, we have the people, and we have the financing. We just need to allow new technologies to solve the issue. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all of our wonderful panelists for their contribution towards today's conversation. It was certainly very interesting to learn about LNG on the African continent and how we can further development on the continent. Please can we give our panelists a round of applause?